I picked the spot because of the sound more than the view. The forest up there near the Olympics has a way of turning rain into music. Soft hissing on the needles, a deeper thrum where drops gather on cedar and let go all at once. I'd planned 2 nights off trail for photos and the kind of quiet that makes your thoughts lay down. I set a small tarp tight between 2 firs, pitched the tent beneath it, and ran a thin line to keep the fly from sagging. Everything smelled like wet soil and cold sap, the kind of smell you don't get to keep when you leave. The rain had already been working for hours by the time I boiled water. Nothing dramatic, just steady Pacific Northwest drizzle, the kind that fills a forest without ever rattling it. The creek below camp was swollen, but not angry. I ate, listened, and took a few long exposures of the black trees and the pale stripe of water. Light doesn't go anywhere out there. It just gets thinner until it's gone. I tucked my pistol in the mesh pocket by my sleeping pad, habit from a lot of solo nights, not a statement, and slid into the kind of sleep you fall through instead of climb toward. What woke me wasn't loud, it was precise. There's a rhythm to rain you learn without trying, a constant patter, tiny syncopations where needles drip, the small ticks when drops find chord and run all at once. This sound didn't belong to that family. It came through the pattern like a metronome through a recording. Squelch. Pause. Squelch. Wet pine needles don't make the same sound as dry ones underfoot. They give a little, hold a shoe for a fraction of a heartbeat, then let it go with a soft suction where water gathers. That was the sound. Slow, placed steps moving just beyond the tarp line. If it had been an animal, I think my brain would have filed it where animals live, but the steps were too evenly spaced, too polite about weight. You learn the difference.
I didn't unzip anything. I didn't move. I lay there and counted the distance between each step and the next. They made a single lap around the tent and stopped near the head end, close enough I could hear rain hit cloth, and then the softer whisper of it sliding onto the ground. For a moment there was nothing else. No creek, no wind, just the idea of someone standing near a nylon wall with a storm between us. I told myself the oldest lies first. Deer, elk, a late hiker cutting across the flats and stopping to check his bearings. None of those lies near a quiet circle around a stranger's tent in rain at midnight. I reached for the pistol with the same feeling you reach for a blanket when you're chilled, familiar weight cool against my palm. I didn't chamber anything. The sound would be loud in that still world, and I didn't want to add noise to whatever equation I was solving. Light feels like safety until it doesn't. I thumbed on the headlamp to its lowest setting and let the beam smear the tent fabric. The footfalls stopped instantly, like a hand lifted off a drum. When I killed the light, the rain took a moment to sound like rain again. I breathed with it until my chest felt like part of the pattern. The steps started up after a while, not enough to call minutes. Time was wet and without edges in there. Squelch. Closer to the back this time. Then a pause that ran long enough to make me think the night had changed its mind. Then the careful roll of weight one more step as if whoever was outside was testing how quiet a person could be when every part of the world was trying to announce them. I thought of calling out, "Hey, I'm here," or the more practical, "Trail's the other way." But my mouth didn't want to give the night my voice. It felt like throwing a thing you might not get back.
When you're alone long enough in bad weather, you get used to your body sending you messages, as if it's someone else. Goose flash is a kind of speech. The fine muscles along your jaw tightening like fingers on a rope. Lying there, I could track my own fear by the way I measured breath. Long in, longer out, like I was trying not to fog a window I couldn't see through. The circle continued, always at a pace a human could hold without thinking. Once, when the steps stopped near my left shoulder, I heard something I hoped was rain slipping off the tarp edge and not breath. It could have been either. I made the shape of a person in my head to keep from giving that shape to the real dark outside. Tall, short, soaked, hood up, hat down, nothing stuck. It's hard to name someone who won't speak. At some point the steps moved away, not on a line, not running, just widening into the noise of the storm until I couldn't tell the difference between choice and weather. I kept the headlamp off and let the pistol sit where my hand could find it without looking. Sleep never returned in the way sleep returns. The night just grew and folded around me until its edges blurred again. The tent fabric snapped twice in a stray gust. The creek found a throatier voice, and I counted small things because large ones didn't help. The spatter where drops hit the tarp brace, the quiet breath of condensation visiting the fly, the single mosquito that had found summer in a sleeve I'd left near the mesh. Dawn and rain is a rumor before it's a fact. The first light that made it through the canopy found nothing shiny, just a billion wet surfaces refusing to glow. I unzipped slow, prepared to see a clean circle of trampled needles and nothing else. The forest had made other plans.
Boot prints. Not heavy, not deep like a stomp, but clearly human. The tread was a common enough pattern. Small blocks, a few diagonal bars. They circled the tent twice, just as deliberate as my ears had promised. On the side near my head, the prints came closer, toes pointed in, like a person standing at arm's length. I could see where water had pooled in the bottom of each impression and made a tiny mirror. I followed him out from the tarp line into the open bit of flat where I'd set the tripod. The prints kept an even distance from each other, careful, like someone who didn't want to slip, or like someone who had all the time in the world to be precise. 20 feet from the tent, they just quit. Not as in fading, not as in the ground turning to rock. The forest floor was the same. Wet needles, slick soil. The last print was as crisp as the first. After it, nothing. No heel, no toe, no smudge. The trees began there, yes, and sword ferns feathered the edges. But there was a fair patch where you'd expect the prints to continue if a person had stepped on the earth as a person does. I walked a small fan outward in case I'd missed a pivot. The only new tracks were mine. I don't believe in easy answers when I'm cold and hungry, so I made a list of the good, boring ones. Dropped from a log? Maybe, except there wasn't one nearby. Backed up in his own prints and stepped into brush. Possible, but the rain would have told on it. Double steps make mush. Somebody in light trail runners making a game of it? Sure. People do odd things near other people without wanting to be those other people. I took pictures because sometimes you need a later version of yourself to testify on your behalf. Then I broke camp in a rhythm that didn't feel rushed, but also never wasted emotion. The tarp went first, water sheeting off in a silver curtain. The tent sagged in on itself like an animal sleeping. I packed the pistol away like any other piece of gear, familiar, unremarkable. The rain softened toward drizzle, and then toward the kind of fine mist that doesn't land so much as reside in the air.
On the way out, the forest felt like a room after a conversation you can't quote. The trail I'd made coming in was already half erased by the night's work, my steps rounded by drip and time. Once, maybe a quarter mile from camp, I thought I heard those slow, deliberate footfalls again, far to my right. They might have belonged to a branch easing back to where it started, or to a person who'd finished what they came to do and wanted to see if I could hear them leave. Back at the car, the rain on the roof made the kind of sound you can measure by. I wiped fog from the windshield with the back of my hand and watched the wipers make a task of what water does to glass. A couple pulled into the lot in a rented SUV, the kind of bright white that looks out of place in weather that's all blue and green. We nodded the way people nod when they've agreed to share the same huge thing without discussing it. I don't have an ending for you that fixes anything. I didn't find a campsite 100 yards away with a stranger's tent and a wet pair of boots outside. I didn't meet a ranger who said, "Oh sure, we get a guy out there who likes to walk circles around tents in the rain." The forest took in what I'd heard and did what forests do. It kept being itself, indifferent, perfect at it. At home, when the first big spring storm worked across the city and the gutters started their hard hymn, I lay in bed and listened the way I'd learned to listen under a tarp. Rain has its numbers. It'll teach them to you if you ask. Every now and then, my ear found an extra beat, an off-count pause in the measure. Squelch, if a floorboard could remember a needle bed, a space where something might step. I sleep fine. Better than fine most nights. But sometimes when it rains at night, I still catch myself counting the spaces between the drops, waiting to hear that extra rhythm in between.
The wipers had fallen into that tired rhythm old trucks get. Left, right, hesitate, squeak. Like the glass itself was a field project I was slowly cleaning with patience. Western Oregon storm nights flatten the world into a small, bright box ahead of your headlights. Everything else is wet black. I'd put off checking the camera grid for a week because the creek crossings had been chewing at the culverts, but the data window was closing and the district wanted a fresh pull before the next front rolled in. So I left town after dark with a thermos and a printed map in case the GPS decided to think about it too hard. Out here, 15 miles of forest road is both nothing and everything. You know the names: Road 19, 19A, Spurs 7, until the numbers stop mattering, and it's just the feel of where the ground lifts and where the drainage is cut. The Douglas fir stands so tight the rain doesn't fall so much as percolate down.
and the understory smells like wet fern and sap and a little bit of rusted metal somewhere you can't see. My gear was the usual: Pelican case for cards and batteries, rain jacket, headlamp, a pair of rubber boots rolling around behind the seat, and a pistol in the glove box because field work changes your definition of routine. Cell service fades out past the second gate. I don't mind. Radio static is its own kind of company. The truck heater pushed a steady stream at my ankles, and I let my shoulders drop, watching the road number stenciled in white flash by on the brown fiberglass posts. I had cameras on the Elk Corridor and the lower meadow, then two further up where a side drainage braids through Alder. It would be a quiet loop, back to pavement by 11 if the washouts were tame. I saw the light just after the marker for 19A. At first I took it for a reflector on someone's post, a hunting camp marker left from earlier in the season. It was a small, steady orange glow about 50 yards off the road, behind two ranks of trunks, moving in that way a swinging lantern moves. Not a sway so much as a pulse. Brighter, dimmer, brighter again as the rain stitched the beam. I lifted off the gas to get a better look, and the wipers did their squeak hesitate thing right when the light passed behind a thicker tree. By the time the glass cleared, the glow was gone. Okay, I thought, campfire ember. People forget coals. 2 corners later, I saw it again. Left side, same depth into the timber, same soft orange, like a kerosene lantern hooded by a hand. I slowed to 20 and kept my line. It matched me. Not exactly. Nothing with that kind of distance and cover could keep perfect time, but close enough that when I braked, the glow seemed to pause, and when I rolled, it rolled. And when I drifted through a flooded dip, the light jumped in that same rhythm as if it hit the same imaginary pothole out there in the trees. Illegal camps happen. People duck off these roads with a tarp and a 5-gallon bucket and call it home until someone asks him not to. But there's usually a look to that. Blue plastic with a scatter of things trying to be a life. This was just a life that drifted through trees and refused to be anything else. I pulled to the narrow shoulder where a turnout begins and rolled the window down. Rain blew in cold enough to make my forearm pucker. I listened for people sounds, voices, a dog, a particular clank of someone moving stuff in the wet. What I heard was water moving every way water knows how to move in a storm. Down through needles, off bark, across ruts, out of the ditch in a series of hurried decisions. Under that, faint, but there, a metallic clinking. Not constant, not rhythmic. A tap, like a handle hitting a glass chimney. Then quiet. Then another tap as the air caught something that was dangling. "Hello?" I called. More field tech than rescuer. "You okay out there?" Rain answered back. The clink didn't repeat. I sat long enough for the heater to lose the fight with the open window, and then shut it to think. The map on the passenger seat was damp at one corner. I smoothed it anyway. The red line of Road 19 snaked up toward the old spur the crews stopped maintaining in the 70s. There had been cabins once. The district file folders are full of cabins that are now memories you step through without noticing. I told myself I'd go 50 yards more, see if there was a pullout down to the creek where someone might have parked, and if there wasn't, I'd turn around and come back in daylight. When I put the truck in gear and eased forward, the light kept pace. Only now it seemed closer to the road, like whoever carried it had moved in. A branch leaned out too far and scraped along the passenger side with the slow teeth-on-tin foil sound metal makes when it remembers it's thin. I braked instinctively and the glow settled, just beyond a screen of firs, orange cinched tight by rain. "Okay," I said, out loud because voice gives shape to your thoughts. "We're turning around." There's not much that makes me nervous out here. Most days the weather is your biggest opponent, and you get along fine if you accept it's going to win eventually. But I have rules about nights and storm edges and people who don't answer when you offer them a voice. The turnout was shallow and half full of water. I eased the truck forward and then backed, feathering the wheel and watching my mirrors like they were my job, because for the next 10 seconds they were. Headlights carve stories they don't mean to when you swing them across timber. Mine swept left to right and broke as they passed each trunk, and in the clean gaps I could see the orange lantern not just to my left anymore, but on my side of the drainage, maybe 20 feet from the ditch. It glowed like something domestic in a place that had nothing to do with houses. And for a second I had the utterly normal urge to step out and pick it up, the way you might pick up a dropped mitten. Then I hit the high beams without thinking, and the light vanished, as if someone had palmed it. No dimming, no drift, just gone. My heart did the embarrassing thud it does when you stumble on flat ground. I finished the three-point turn with more tire spin than finesse and pointed the truck back the way I'd come. I told myself if it was a camp, I'd see it in the mirror, and if it wasn't, the mirror wouldn't help. I drove. For about a quarter mile, there was only rain and the particular comfort of retracing your own ruts. Then in the corner of my eye, the orange began again, keeping pace to my left just beyond the line of sight, patient as a person with a plan. I didn't open the window this time. I listened to the way the rain changed its mind as I passed crosscuts and culverts. Once, when I slowed for a downed limb, the glow appeared between two alder, impossibly close to the road, low enough that if there had been eyes behind it, they would have been at my knee. And just for a flicker, literally a flicker, the beams caught two hard points of reflection at the edge of the ditch. Not animal eye green, not the quick flash of a deer, a flat paired glint like rain on glass. Then nothing again but road and fur and water. Headlights carve stories they don't mean to when you swing them across timber. Mine swept left to right and broke as they passed each trunk, and in the clean gaps I could see the orange lantern not just to my left anymore, but on my side of the drainage, maybe 20 feet from the ditch. It glowed like something domestic in a place that had nothing to do with houses, and for a second I had the utterly normal urge to step out and pick it up, the way you might pick up a dropped mitten. Then I hit the high beams without thinking, and the light vanished as if someone had palmed it. No dimming, no drift, just gone. My heart did the embarrassing thud it does when you stumble on flat ground. I finished the three-point turn with more tire spin and finesse and pointed the truck back the way I'd come. I told myself if it was a camp, I'd see it in the mirror, and if it wasn't, the mirror wouldn't help. I drove. For about a quarter mile, there was only rain and the particular comfort of retracing your own ruts. Then in the corner of my eye, the orange began again, keeping pace to my left just beyond the line of sight, patient as a person with a plan. I didn't open the window this time. I listened to the way the rain changed its mind as I passed crosscuts and culverts. Once, when I slowed for a downed limb, the glow appeared between two alder, impossibly close to the road, low enough that if there had been eyes behind it, they would have been at my knee. And just for a flicker, literally a flicker, the beams caught two hard points of reflection at the edge of the ditch. Not animal eye green, not the quick flash of a deer, a flat, paired glint like rain on glass. Then nothing again but road and fur and water.
The miles take longer on the way out when you know you're measuring them against your own second guessing. At pavement, the world became world again. Reflective paint, the flattened shine of street lights 5 miles off, the soft whoosh of tires throwing water into that satisfying rooster tail you only see when you don't have to care about the ditch. I drove to the highway, then home, because that's how those choices work. You make 1,000 small ones that feel like nothing, and then one that means you're done for the night. In the morning, I reported the possibility of a stranded camper to the ranger on duty at the district office. He listened with the patience of a man who has been carrying coffee since long before it was a personality trait. He asked the right questions first: distance from the road, whether I'd seen a vehicle or tarp, if the light had a steady burn like propane or a softer pulse like oil. When I told him I hadn't seen anything but the glow and the way it seemed to move with me, he scratched under his cap and said, "Road 19? Yes." Huh. He made a small sound with his mouth. Not agreement, not disbelief. Folks report that sometimes. Lantern out past 19A when the rain's thick. We've had crews lose things out there. Washouts take more than culverts. Old guys used to say a lantern went missing off a truck in the 70s when they were pulling line. Shows up now and then when the weather's like you described. No cabins up there anymore. We pulled the last ones out before I started.
I smiled because that's what you do when someone hands you a story instead of an answer. He smiled back because that's what he meant to do. He said, "If you want to go up in daylight, I'll ride. Otherwise, write it down and put it with the other strange things. Check your cameras next clear day." We both knew what I was going to choose. I did the loop 2 days later under a sky so sharply blue it felt childish. The roads were scabbed out where the storm had worked them. The cameras were fine. Elk heavy on the corridor, a black bear nosing a fern into indignation, a raccoon family performing a small parade. I stopped at the turnout out of habit and walked 20 yards into the trees, boots slicking on duff. There was nothing to see you could call a clue. A shard of old glass in the ditch, a square nail in the mud near the post. Things that could have been anywhere. I don't avoid the road, not really. Work is work, and you go where your grid puts you. But I route my storm night drives in a way that makes me a little later to the lower meadow and a little earlier to pavement. It feels like tilting the table just enough that marbles roll where you want them. Back home, sometimes the rain finds my windows just right, and the room goes the same color as the inside of a truck cab at 10:43 p.m. in November. The wipers are the dog's tail against the laundry basket. The heater is the heater, and the glass will catch a reflection. Street light, brake light, neighbor's porch, and throw an orange breath across the corner of my eye. I know what it is. Most days, that's enough. But sometimes, when the rain hits the glass just right, I catch a flash of orange in the tree line, and for a second, I slow down. We were supposed to be sleeping. The storm had rolled in too fast for the forecast to matter, and the ridge had turned into a river of slick clay before we could finish clearing brush. The rest of the crew was huddled under tarps down by the trucks, but Jonah and I stayed up at the old fire line, sitting beside a dying camp stove that hissed like it was tired of pretending to be a fire. The rain came sideways, hard enough to blur the line between trees and fog. The forest there was second growth, tight spruce with limbs low enough to snag your jacket. The smell of wet ash still hung in the soil from the controlled burn we'd done a week earlier. Steam rose out of the black dirt, mixing with the storm. We'd been working that section all day, felling dead trees, checking erosion barriers, and we were the last to leave the ridge. The radios had been our only real company. In weather like that, voices break into static, but they're comforting all the same. The crackle of a signal feels like proof you're not the last one awake. Around 10, we decided to make one more call before sleeping. Jonah thumbed the mic and said, "Base, line 3, you copy?" A pause, just rain on metal. Then the speaker hissed, "Line 3, go ahead." We both heard it, our own voices. Not echoes, not playback, but our voices. Clean and clear through the static. Jonah froze, fingers still on the transmit. "What the hell?" "Base, you're tutting out," I said automatically, though it didn't sound like a glitch. It sounded like someone had recorded us earlier and was playing it back a few seconds late. The radio hissed again. "Line 3, go ahead." Same words, same rhythm. This time, it was slower. Jonah leaned closer to the speaker. "That's not bass." We sat still long enough for the stove flame to gutter out. Rain filled the quiet soft and steady again, as if the storm had decided to listen. He tried again. "Bass, confirm traffic." The reply came clear as before. Our voices. "Base, confirm traffic." This time it was exact. Every inflection, every breath. I shut the radio off. The silence it left was heavier than the static had been. Jonah just stared at the thing like it might speak on its own. We stayed close to the tent after that. The dark outside felt physical, thick enough to hide anything that wanted to stand there and wait. Somewhere below, thunder cracked, distant and wrong for the timing of the lightning. Then we heard it, not from the radio this time, but from the tree line. A voice, quiet, wet like air forced through soaked cloth. "Base, line 3, you copy?" Jonah went pale. "No." It came again, closer now, shaped by the wind. "Base, line 3. I grabbed the flashlight, switched it on, and swept the beam toward the sound. Rain made the light bloom white, useless. No shapes, no eyes, just fog and trunks. We didn't say anything after that. We just sat there until the world started turning gray at the edges and the rain slowed from hammer to whisper. The forest returned to itself in small pieces. First the frogs, then the wind. When the sky finally lightened up, We packed up and headed downhill. Neither of us spoke until the trucks came into view. At the base camp, the others were drinking burnt coffee and swearing at wet boots. I asked the duty officer if he'd called us last night. He shook his head. Nobody's radioed after 9. Power cut at base for lightning safety. Jonah didn't wait to hear more. He tossed his pack into the truck bed and started the engine. 2 days later, he mailed me his half of the pay and said he was done with fire lines for good. I kept the job, but I don't go up ridges alone anymore. Radios still crackle strange when storms get close. Voices bending through static like they're deciding what to sound like. And every so often, when the rain hits hard against the cab and the night presses close, the speaker on the dash wakes itself up just enough to whisper, "Line 3, you copy?" And I don't answer.
It rained from the moment I parked until the moment I left. Oregon rain doesn't fall, it soaks. The forest drinks until every surface glistens, every tree root turns slick, and the air feels half liquid. I'd come out for one night, short solo camp before the work week started, just to reset my brain. The site was an unofficial pull-off along a forest road, a good half-mile from anyone else. By dusk, I had the tarp stretched over my tent like a second roof, coffee steaming from the jet boil, and a soft hiss of rain that could lull anyone to sleep. The world beyond 10 feet was watercolor gray and green, blurred by mist. My phone had no signal, which was part of the point. It was the kind of night where sound has shape. You hear the forest breathe, the slow patter of drops rolling off needles, the muted thump when one heavy enough hits the tarp, and the quiet groan of a trunk bending under wet weight. Peaceful in that lonely way that makes you feel both lucky and small. Sometime after midnight, a sharp snap cut through the river. Nylon under tension. My tarp line. I sat up, heart thudding, listening hard. Another snap, then the metallic plank of a stake coming loose. Wind? Maybe. But the air was still. Rain straight down, no sway in the trees. I unzipped the 10-inch and peeked out with my headlamp. The beam caught nothing but sheets of water, the silvery curtain you get when rain hits full saturation. My tarp still stood. The noise must have been something else, maybe a branch giving way. I zipped the tent and told myself I'd imagined a metallic sound. Sleep came in uneasy stretches, the kind where dreams awaken, overlap. I remember rolling over, hearing what I thought was the creek just beyond camp, then realizing the rhythm didn't match. The water noise had a pattern: drag, slap, drag, slap, like fabric brushing wet ground. When I opened my eyes, the rain had softened, but something new filled the soundscape. A faint rustle, close. Not the high whisper of leaves. It was heavier, deliberate. I turned on my headlamp again and aimed toward the door. Through the gray mesh, I could see the outline of my tarp, and beside it, another shape. Rectangular, low, the edges straight as if stretched tight. A tarp. Someone had strung another tarp beside my tent. For a long time, I didn't move, just watched the rain bead on the nylon and listened to my own pulse. The new tarp creaked softly in the downpour, water running off its edge into the mud. I whispered, "Hello?" Nothing. I told myself it could have been there all along. Maybe I hadn't noticed it when I set up in the rain. but I'd walked that patch of ground a dozen times, flat, empty, clean. Eventually, I worked up the nerve to unzip the tent halfway. The beam from my headlamp swept the tarp beside me, olive green, modern, strung tight between two trees less than 6 feet from my shelter. Beneath it, something dark lay on the ground, a sleeping bag, zipped. I called out again, louder. "Hey, you all right?" The forest absorbed my voice. The rain didn't even flinch. I waited, but the shape under the tarp didn't move. I told myself no one would lie down in a bag that close to another tent without saying something. The longer I looked, the less it seemed like a person inside. Too still, too perfect. I backed into my tent and zipped up fully, pistol in hand, though I hated the thought of it. I stayed like that till dawn, the rain thinning to drizzle, and my heart wearing itself out. When light finally crept in through the trees, I unzipped the tent again. The tarp was still there, edges sagging now, rain pooled on top. I stepped out barefoot, half expecting to wake up whoever had decided to share my camp. The sleeping bag was empty, damp inside but clean. No footprints around it except mine. Whoever or whatever had placed it there had done it quietly, carefully. The bag's hood was cinched halfway shut, as if someone had zipped it to shape and walked away. A few feet beyond, I found my tarp stake lying bent in the mud, the one I thought had snapped earlier. I packed fast, every movement mechanical. Stove, ground sheet, poles, everything. When I pulled the last line free, the new tarp sagged and fell over like it had given up pretending to be useful. I left it there. On the way out, the rain started again, soft, forgiving. The forest looked the same as it always does after a night of hard weather. Clean, ancient, unbothered. I wanted to believe that the second tarp had been there before I arrived, some forgotten remnant of an old camp. But I keep replaying that moment when the nylon creaked beside my tent, when I knew, before I ever looked, that something was being built in the dark. I don't camp alone much anymore. When I do, I scan the ground before pitching anything, and I make sure there's only one tarp in sight. Just mine.
We weren't supposed to be there after dark. The map said 8 miles round trip, moderate, clearly marked, back by sunset. But the rain started early, and the switchbacks near the ridge turned the trail into a stairway of mud. Every time we thought we'd reached the top, the fog rolled in thicker, and the forest swallowed our sense of direction. It was just me and Kyle, two friends trying to squeeze one last hike into a wet spring weekend in the Cascades. We had headlamps, ponchos, GPS on our phones, and just enough misplaced confidence to think that was enough. By the time we started heading down, it was nearly midnight. The rain had eased to a fine mist, just enough to make the beam from our lights catch the drops like stack in the air. The trail wound down in endless hairpins, each turn identical to the one before it. You could smell wet earth and cedar, hear the low sigh of wind through trees that felt too tall to ever end. "Feels like we've been here already," Kyle said. His light caught my breath as I laughed. "Everything looks the same in rain." He didn't laugh back. We walked another 10 minutes before I noticed something small glinting in the beam. Tiny silver tacks nailed to a trunk, catching our light like cat eyes. Trail markers. "See, we're good," I said. "They use these for night runs." We followed them, one after another,
each spaced maybe 20 feet apart. The path beneath our boots stayed steady, mud giving way to fir needles, then back again. I started to relax, counting tacks like breadcrumbs home. Then Kyle stopped. "Hold on." He pointed to a tree ahead. The next tack shimmered, then the next 20 feet beyond it lowered to the ground. "Those are fresh," he said. "You see how they're bright? The ones up top are dull." He was right. The lower ones looked newer, shinier, as if someone had replaced them. And the spacing was tighter now, 10 feet, then 5. "You think someone's remarking the trail?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. The forest felt too quiet, like even the rain had started listening. We kept following, slower now, the silver eyes pulling us forward. Then the line of tacks curved left, away from where the map said the main path should run. Shortcut, I guessed, maybe a side trail. Kyle hesitated and followed me anyway. The new path narrowed, trees crowding close until the light from our headlamps hit bark less than an arm's length away. The tacks kept going, still gleaming, still leading. We didn't speak for a while. The forest pressed in, wet pine smell, fog creeping low. Then my light caught something ahead, a tack on a trunk I recognized. I stopped. "Wait, that's the same one." Kyle blinked. "No way." But when we stepped closer, I saw it clearly. The nick below the tack, the patch of missing moss where I'd brushed the tree earlier. The line of reflectors curved right back towards us. We hadn't been following new markers, we'd been following our own. Kyle's mouth opened to say something, but before he could, the forest filled with light. A soft, pulsing glow just ahead through the fog, like someone holding a lantern, swinging slow. "Hey," I called, stepping forward. "Where?" The light moved, quick, sideways, vanishing behind a ridge of ferns. We chased it without thinking, slipping in mud, crashing through brush until we hit the switchback again. No lantern, no person, just the same tack on the same tree staring back at us. That's when we saw the footprints. 2 sets in the mud, ours looping tight in the same circle. We turned off our headlamps and stood still, trying to hear past our breathing. Somewhere below, faint but clear, metal clinked against metal. "You hear that?" Kyle whispered. I nodded. The sound came again, tap, tap, like someone hammering tacks into wood. We didn't wait to find out. We took the main path back down, walking fast but not running, checking over our shoulders every few minutes. The sound didn't follow us, but the forest never lost that strange, awake feeling. We reached the trailhead at 2 in the morning, soaked and shaken. The ranger station was closed, the parking lot empty except for our car, roof glittering with mist. Neither of us said much on the drive home. 2 days later, curiosity got the better of me. I checked the trail reports online, maintenance logs, volunteer notes, anything about new markers. Nothing. The section we'd hiked hadn't been serviced in months. A week after that, Kyle sent me a photo he'd taken without realizing. In it, one of the trees we'd passed glowed faintly in the flash, a tack shining bright, and beside it, a new one driven into the wood at eye level. The rain had been falling that night too. We don't hike in storms anymore, not because of what we saw, but because sometimes the forest gives you direction, and sometimes it gives you company. And when the light flashes between the trees, we let it lead whoever it's waiting for.